สวัสดีครับผมเดียวนะครับวันนี้นะครับผมได้โอกาสที่ดีได้สัมภาษณ์คุณอดัมโรเจอร์ถ้าไงพบกับคุณอดัมโรเจอร์เลยแล้วกันนะครับสวัสดีครับ
สวัสดีครับ
Nice to meet you again.
Nice to meet you.
I'm glad to see you in Thailand again.
Very happy to be here.
Yeah. Okay. The first question: How did you start the DICE project?
How did I start it?
Yeah.
Well, I had sort of an inspiration to try to write a bunch of music for sort of this, for lack of a better word, like power trio setting with electric bass, drums, and electric guitar, specifically, you know, the Fender Stratocaster. So I wrote a lot of music sort of in a flurry. Like, you know, I went, oh, okay, and I wrote like 10 songs or something. And Fima and Nate are two people I've played a lot with together. Fima and I go back very many years from playing with a group called Lost Tribe, and a lot of local New York groups from starting in the 1980s. And Nate and I had played with saxophonist Chris Potter's group together.
Yes.
So they were, I mean, without even thinking for 5 minutes, I knew that they were the perfect musicians for this project because of their particular talents and abilities. So we just started playing. This was like 2008, I think. And there's a place in New York called 55 Bar. That's a small club bar that I've played in a lot. That's a great venue to, like, you know, work on music, not have to present a finished perfect product, you know. So we played there quite a bit over the years and sort of refined and developed the music. Yeah.
Okay. In this album, the DICE, how did you compose the song in this album?
How?
How did from jam, from start from the melody, from chord progression, or
Mostly from sort of a guitar perspective. As I said, you know, when I thought of putting this group together, I sort of framed it around this, I don't want to say classic idea of a power trio, but definitely like Hendrix-influenced guitar-based
and drum
songs. Yeah, and drums. So some of the songs come from, I'm sure it's pretty obvious, like guitar patterns and riffs that I almost like would play them and then orchestrate what I was playing for the drums and bass. Like on some of the songs on the record, there's a song called C minor, for example, that's basically just like a big rhythm guitar figure that I gave the lowest parts of the figure to the bass and then came up with sort of an idea for a beat and, you know, and then obviously the music evolved from playing it with Fima and Nate. So I guess if there were, most of the songs started sort of from the guitar. But having said that also, I get these ideas in my head that I hear a certain kind of sound, you know, it might be a sound that is inspired by any number of music, any number of musics that I've heard, or maybe a vibe. So it depends. Sometimes the music starts in my head. Sometimes it could come from like an idea of a drum beat I hear in my head that I think, oh, that would be a great groove to write a song with. So most of it either, I mean, it comes from either the guitar, a bass line, or a drum beat. But probably mostly from
guitar.
From guitar, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
I mean, that's
okay. In this album, there are a lot of the songs that you have to improvise on the one chord, like on one chord. How do you have the way to play the interesting the improvisation on the one chord?
I mean, that's a very complicated question. It's a simple question, but the answer to it is pretty complicated because I come from, I started playing music, playing the guitar pretty much based on the inspiration of listening to Jimi Hendrix, but I've been playing straight ahead jazz music since I was a little kid. So the techniques that I use to play over one chord are similar to the techniques I use to play over one chord when I'm playing more straight ahead jazz. And those techniques are many different things. Using, if I had to simplify them, it would either be, chromaticizing something in a key by starting to play different scales or altering minor or major scales in the key that I'm improvising over, or thinking about playing polytonally. So thinking about sort of putting different key centers over the key that I'm in. So again, trying to simplify it, in the first instance, if the song was over a D minor chord, I might play, instead of a D minor scale, like an altered scale or a diminished scale that both have minor thirds and dominant sevenths in them, but have flat nines and flat fives. So I'll start to sort of take a chord or a scale in a key and kind of pull at it, add notes to it, thus maybe creating different scales, whereas the other approach, and it's not as if I choose either or, at this point for me, it's just, most of it is very intuitive for me, I'm not really thinking about it. The other approach would be if I'm in D minor and I think I'm just going to play an A flat, or maybe I play an F minor, which has a D note in it, but I'm thinking of it's almost like thinking of making slash chords, like F minor over D, which I've found if you think about how you're approaching harmony or melody in these different ways, you play them differently. It might be the same notes. Like if I play F minor over D minor or D, if you start that F minor scale on D, it ends up being just a D flat 9, flat 5, flat 6 scale. But if you think about it as being F minor over D, you might use it differently because you're like putting something on top of something instead of taking something and expanding it.
Yes, thank you so much.
But I don't think about these things when I'm playing. This is all, I've done it so much and I've practiced it so much and had so much experience playing that when I'm improvising, I don't have to, it's not really an intellectual process. And usually when I'm playing, I always tell students that your ears and your fingers should be having a conversation all the time. That your fingers tell your ears something, and then your ears tell your fingers something. So that all the knowledge you require from practicing and studying, it just helps make your ears bigger. So you can say, oh, I hear something unusual, and you go, oh, it's this scale. I can do that right away because I know all these different scales. So, it should be ultimately that you expand your knowledge base so that it's so big and it's so much a part of your system that you don't have to think about it. You can just use it, the same way that somebody who just learned a pentatonic scale could use that freely. You know what I mean?
Okay, thank you so much. You have the very excellent rhythmic and time. When you're praying, can you give me some advice how to practice the good rhythmic and time?
Well, listen to and imitate people who have great rhythm and great time. First of all, so that you have an idea of what that's supposed to be. And, you know, I mean, I think everybody should listen to a lot of different music, but, you know, there are examples of that in so many different styles. I mean, from Sonny Rollins, Wes Montgomery, Charlie Parker, all of the great straight-ahead jazz musicians. Hendrix had great time. Any James Brown track is a study in perfect rhythm. And
Yes.
so, and then, but regardless of what you have in your mind, you have to be able to execute what it is that you want to execute. So it's one thing to have in your head an idea of James Brown perfect
Yes.
rhythm, but you have to be able to actually play that too. So you have to practice tons of scales with the metronome, with records, and so that you have an idea of what great rhythm is in your head, that you could sing it or clap it, and then be able to do that on the guitar because your technique is up to you know, the level that allows you to express what it is that you hear. So,
Maybe we let's talk about straight ahead jazz. When you start to learn the new standard jazz song, what is your process?
well, I try to learn songs by ear.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that I find a record that I like, a version of a standard, and I learn it from that. Because I've found if I learn it, if I memorize something from ear, it tends to stay with me more than if I look at a chart. But so there's that. Playing a song in a lot of different keys is helpful to in retaining the song. Because it's one thing, you know, like if you learn a song on Tuesday and you remember it on Wednesday, and then the thing is to try to remember it the next Wednesday. Or if you're on a gig and 2 weeks later and someone says, hey, let's play this, and you go, oh, okay. You know, so the thing is really to try to figure out how to burn it into your memory, which is hard. Repetition over and over and over again, that's the way to remember things best, I've found. You know.
You often transcribe the song or transcribe the solo from a lot of artists?
I do, yeah. I mean, not a lot of whole solos. I usually, you know, I'll take pieces of solos now. I mean, I've done a lot of transcribing since I started, but now, you know, I'll take pieces of solos off. You know, and I still play Charlie Parker solos, you know. Like, yeah, I listen to Charlie Parker all the time.
Okay. Let's talk about your gear and your effect, your amp that you use.
Okay.
Okay. And now you use this guitar?
This guitar, yes.
Is it Fender?
It's a Fender Stratocaster from 1965.
Yes. This is the original?
It's original, except for the frets.
And how about amp and effect?
I have a lot of amps. I have a lot of other guitars too, many vintage guitars. The amp with this guitar that I play most frequently is a 1971 Marshall 50-watt bass head. On the Dice record, I played that and an amp that's a divided by 13, and also an old Fender Vibrolux reverb. So I don't have the Marshall with me tonight. I'll be playing a couple of reissue Fender Deluxe reverbs. But the setup for Dice generally is this guitar, my Marshall. I have a custom-made 212 cabinet. And my effects, I use very few effects. You know, the distortion I use, especially when I have the Marshall, is I just turn up the amp.
Okay,
it's
from
like,
here.
Yes, just there's no master volume. It's just an old Marshall. So the only thing that I have is I also have an attenuator that allows me to turn the volume down if I turn the head up. And I use a volume pedal, a little Ibanez analog delay, and I have an old Fender reverb tank from the early 60s. You know, it's just like a spring reverb tank.
Okay. And the gear when you play straight ahead jazz?
It varies. A lot of times it's my Gibson ES335. It's a 1999, and on my records it's typically an old. It's like a 1966 Fender twin reverb, and then I have a 1967 Showman head that I put through a Pacific cabinet, and I play them stereo. On gigs, I don't always play with those two, the twin reverb, sometimes the Vibrolux reverb.
Can you give me the name of the guitar book if that you think is good for the student to practice?
I don't know any guitar books. I'm sorry, I wish I could. The two guitar books I would recommend to students are the Charlie Parker Omnibook and the Johann Sebastian Bach Violin Sonatas and Partitas. It's not for guitar, but if you can play those two books, you're going to be just fine.
Play it with metronome.
Yes, and or with the Charlie Parker solos with his records. You have to learn how to play them with him. Because speaking of good rhythm and time, it's one thing to learn the notes, but you have to learn how to play them like the way he played them, or as close as possible. That's 50% of it is the notes, and 50% of it is the phrasing. So those are my guitar books.
Very good. The last one. What is the most important thing that guitarist or jazz student guitarist should pay attention but they are not?
Really solid basic technique. Something that we as guitarists don't have that other musicians have is that typically, like if you play piano, everybody who plays piano starts, just playing scales and classical music. There's a basic structural pedagogy that everybody does, or violin or saxophone. Everybody works out of these books that are just very good for technique. Guitarists, as you know, one guy might start because he loves Hendrix, somebody else starts because he loves Van Halen, which can be great because people end up maybe creating something very unique because they don't study the same thing that everybody else does. Typically, I think with people who are not as talented as Wes Montgomery or Jimi Hendrix, sometimes there ends up being a deficit and an inability to play melodic or patterns with just very good rhythm. So I think that studying basic scale stuff, classical music to an extent, I don't mean classical guitar, but playing classical music with a pick, things that help you create a sort of very strong substructure for your playing. And to really focus on rhythmic articulation. That's something that I would say guitarists really, really need to work on hard.
Rhythmic and articulation.
Rhythmic articulation, and doing that by learning how to play scales and arpeggios and learning how to play them, with very little kind of coloristic anything, just very straight, in the way that like a classical pianist would play scales, so that you have the technical control to articulate rhythm the way that you hear it. Because as I was saying before, it's one thing to know, I know that, Charlie Parker or whoever, this great sound of great rhythm in my head, but playing it on the instrument in the way that you hear it requires that your muscles are coordinated enough to do that. So being able to do it involves technique and stuff. So
thank you so much, Adam.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
นี่คือบทสัมภาษณ์ทั้งหมดนะครับน่าจะได้ประโยชน์อย่างแรงมากเลยนะครับสำหรับคนที่เล่นกีตาร์ทั้งหลายนะครับรอติดตามชมว่าครั้งหน้าเราจะพาท่านผู้ชมไปสัมภาษณ์ใครนะครับวันนี้ลาไปก่อนครับสวัสดีครับ